This is the Introduction to Operations Management, Chapter 1. So what is operations management? Operations management is the part of the business organization that is responsible for producing goods or services. So how can we define operations management? It's the management of systems or processes that create goods and or provide services. So the first thing we need to talk about is what is a good or a service. Goods are physical items that include raw materials, parts, subassemblies, final parts. So here's some examples: an automobile, a computer, an oven, shampoo, things that you can actually touch and feel. Services are activities that provide some combination of time, location, form, or psychological value. For example, air travel. Now you can touch the airplane, but the purpose of air travel is to get you from one place to another. Education. This class is a service. A haircut, legal counsel. Those are examples of services. Next, we need to talk about the supply chain. So there's a sequence of activities that organizations use to deliver a good or service. So you start out with the suppliers, then direct suppliers, then a producer, and then it goes to a distributor, and then to the final customer. And the supply chain could be long, it can be short, it varies, but the idea is starting at the beginning to the customer, what are the steps? So there's this transformation process, and so it's in the middle where you have a transformation or conversion, and there's inputs to that process. It may be land, labor, capital, information, and there's outputs, which is either a good or a service. Now you have measurement and feedback coming from the customer that's part of the transformation process, and then there's feedback going to the inputs. And so there's some control where you based on the outputs or your customers, you're changing your transformation conversion process, and then you're also providing input back to your suppliers. So feedback is measurements taken at various points in the transformation process. Control is the comparison of feedback against previously established standards to determine if correction action is needed. So there's this continuum of goods and services. So we'll go through some of these. On the far good side is automobile assembly or steel making. That's primarily goods. But then you get into home remodeling or retail sales. You're starting to mix in a little bit of services there. Computer repair, a restaurant meal. Yes, you're getting food, but what you want with a restaurant meal is you want it fast, you want good service. You're looking for some very specific things that are more service related. Songwriting, software development, you're starting to get more into the services. Surgery, teaching, now you're getting way into completely into the services continuum. So why study operations management? Every aspect of a business affects or is affected by operations. Many service jobs are closely related to operations: financial, marketing, accounting, information. Through learning about operations and supply chains, you'll have a better understanding of, first, the world we live in, global dependencies of companies and nations, reasons why companies fail or succeed, and the importance of working with others. So here's some basic functions of a business organization. There's three basic functions: marketing, operations, finance. So our focus is on operations, but there's interactions between operations and marketing. For example, you have to do budgeting. There's interactions between finance and operations. You have to do budgeting, economic analysis of investment proposals, provision of funds. Those are all finance operations where they overlap. And then there's marketing and operations. Out of marketing, you get demand data, product and service design, competitor analysis, lead time data. All of that comes from marketing. So here's some career opportunities related to operations management and the supply chain. The most obvious is operations manager or supply chain manager. You can have a production analyst, a scheduling coordinator, production manager, industrial engineer, purchasing manager, inventory manager, quality manager. All of those are occupations that are related to operations management. Here's some professional societies. I'm not going to go through all of them. They're mostly here for reference. But if you're interested in getting into more details, you could Google some of these societies on the web and find out more about them. So process management is an important part of operations management. There's 3 categories of business processes. The first is upper management processes. These govern the operation of the entire organization. And then there's the operational processes. These are the core processes that make up the value stream. And then supporting processes. These support the core processes. Supply and demand. So if you have more supply than demand, what happens in your business is it's wasteful and costly. So operations and supply chain is responsible for the supply. Sales and marketing can tell you what the demand is and also create demand. I'll use examples throughout the course. My favorite example is Chipotle. So in this first example, you have a Chipotle restaurant, you have all the food, everything's ready. You walk into the restaurant, you realize you are the only one there. That's an example of way more supply than demand. And there's fluctuations. We'll talk about that later. But if you go at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you might see that where you're the only one there. If you have too much supply and not enough demand, what that means is you're paying for food that's going to get thrown away. You're paying for employees to stand there and talk to each other and not do anything. Now, the other side of the coin is when you have way more demand than you have supply. So now you go to that same Chipotle, and there's this line out the door. You can't find a parking place in the parking lot. You can't even get inside out of the rain. You say, you know what? I don't have time for this. I'm going to go somewhere else. And so you drive away. That's an opportunity loss, a customer dissatisfaction. So that customer who walks away, not only did you not sell them a meal, but they may not come back tomorrow when you don't have anyone there. And then the ideal is supply equals demand. So that's the perfect scenario where you walk up to the counter, there's one person in line, and you're looking at the menu. By the time you figure out what you want, that person is going down the line. You get there. By the time you order, there's one more person there. It's an ideal situation. There's no line, but everybody's busy. They're producing the supply exactly matches demand. Now there's process variation. So there's 4 sources of process variation. The first one is the variety of goods and services being offered. So the more variety you have in goods and services offered, the greater variation in the product or service requirement. The second is structural variation in demand. These are generally predictable, and they're important for capacity planning. So for example, you know that there's going to be high demand around lunch, there's going to be high demand around supper time. Between lunch and supper, it'll be low demand. Late in the evening, there'll be low demand. And then there can be seasonal variations. In the fall, you may have more than in the winter. In retail sales, we talk about Black Friday. That's because that's the day that retail establishments go into the black on Black Friday. Most of the sales are in the later few months, the last couple of months of the year. And then you can also know from year to year. If you have growth, you can predict we're going to grow this much this year. Then there's this random variation that you cannot really understand, or it's just people just happen to show up today, and there's no way to predict it. It's just random. One day you make too much food, the next day you don't have enough, and it really is truly random. And then there's assignable variation. These are from identifiable sources that can be reduced, eliminated by analysis or corrective action. So this is where you have variation that you have control over as a manager. I go into Chipotle, and there's a manager teaching a new employee how much guacamole to put on my burrito. And that assignable variation, if you do too big a scoop, you can run out of guacamole halfway through the day. If you give too small a scoop, you have customers who like, well, man, yesterday I got way more guacamole than today. So your goal is to give everybody the same amount of guacamole on your burrito. And so that's an example of assignable variations. So variations can be disruptive. They result in additional cost, delays, shortages, poor quality, and inefficient work systems. So the scope of operations management ranges across the organization. They include activities such as forecasting, capacity planning, facilities and layout, scheduling, managing inventories, assuring quality, motivating employees, deciding where to locate facilities, and more. And we're going to go through all of these topics throughout this course, but this is just to sort of give you an introduction that everything is interrelated. So the roles of the operations manager. The operations functions consist of all activities directly related to producing goods or providing services. The primary function of the operations manager is to guide the system by decision making. So there's two kinds of decisions. There's system design decisions and system operation decisions. So here's some system design decisions. So the capacity, the facility layout, the facility location, product and service planning, acquisition and placement of equipment. These are typically strategic decisions that require long-term commitment to resources and determine parameters of system operation. So let's go to my Chipotle example. So someone decided that there should be a Chipotle at that location. They decided how big it would be as far as capacity. And if you go from one Chipotle to the next, I've seen them really small and I've seen them fairly big. How much room are you going to have for the line? How much room are you going to have for people to sit down? How long is the preparation space going to be? All of those are system design decisions. Then there's system operation decisions. These are the day-to-day operations. Management of personnel, inventory management and control, scheduling, project management, quality assurance. So operations managers spend more time on this than on the planning. So in the Chipotle, you have to manage the people. So you have to train the people. You have to schedule the people. So you'll want to schedule more people around lunch and supper, and maybe have people take their lunch break between lunch and supper. You do preparation of food between. You manage that structural variation. The peaks and valleys. You manage that. And you're making sure that that server is given the right amount of guacamole. So decision making. So decisions typically what, when, where, how, and who. So what resources are needed and what amounts. When will each resource be needed, and when should the work be scheduled, and when should materials and other supplies be ordered. Where will the work be done? How will the product or service be designed? How will the work be done? And how will resources be allocated? And who will do the work? So those are all operations management decisions. So one approach to decision making is to use modeling. So a model is an abstraction of reality, a simplification of something. So common features of a model: they're simplifications of a real-life phenomenon. They omit unimportant details of the real-life system, and they mimic so the attention can be focused on the most important aspects of the real-life system. So if you were building a new Chipotle restaurant, you could build the model by drawing it on a piece of paper. You could also take some cardboard and set up pretend tables out of boxes and cardboard and walk through this makeshift factory to you could make this model or restaurant. So understanding models. So one of the keys to using a model in decision making is what's its purpose? How is it used to generate results? How are the results interpreted and used? And what are the model's assumptions and limitations? So here's some of the benefits of models. They're easier to use, less expensive than the real system, require users to organize and sometimes quantify information. They increase understanding of the problem. They enable managers to analyze what-if questions. They serve as a consistent tool for evaluations, provide standard format for analyzing a problem, and they enable users to bring the power of mathematics to bear on the problem. So let's talk about the systems approach. A system is a set of interrelated parts that must work together. So we talked about the business organization being composed of three subsystems: marketing, operations, finance. The system approach emphasizes the interrelationships among the systems. The main theme is the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. The output and the objectives of the organization take precedence over any one system. I don't know if you've ever worked in an organization where it's always the other organization's fault. The operations is like, oh, if marketing would have done their job or if finance would have done their job. The idea is how do you get everybody working together? Look at it as a system. Establishing priorities. In nearly all cases, certain issues or items are more important than others. Recognizing this allows managers to focus their attention on what the efforts that will do the most good. There's something called the Pareto phenomenon. It's also called the 80-20 rule. So 80% of your problems come from 20% of the source. So if you can figure out what 20% cause 80% of the problems, then you can start focusing on those. So you can prioritize your problems based on occurrence and give the highest priority. Some people say call it low-hanging fruit or the biggest bang for the buck. How do you get the most by focusing your effort on that Pareto phenomenon. And it's applied to all areas and all levels of management. Where do you get the most for the least amount of effort? So there's a historical evolution of operations management. So there's the Industrial Revolution, the scientific management, human relations management, decision models and management science, and influence of Japanese manufacturers. So we'll start with the Industrial Revolution. So before the Industrial Revolution, there was craft production. This is where highly skilled workers use simple, flexible tools to produce small quantities of customized goods. So there was, the blacksmith. There's the furniture maker would, you would go to the furniture maker and say, I want a chair, and they would make you a chair. And each chair was different. And some of the key elements of the Industrial Revolution began in England in the 1770s. There was the concept of division of labor, the application of the steam engine, the gin and interchangeable parts. So management theory and practice did not advance appreciatively during this period. Then we get to scientific management. This is led by efficiency engineer Frederick Winslow Taylor. He believed in science of management based on observation, measurement, analysis, and improvement of work methods. Management is responsible for planning and selecting and training workers and finding the best way to perform a job. You achieve cooperation between management and workers, and you separate management functions from work functions. And the emphasis is on managing or maximizing output. The next is the human relations movement. The human relations movement emphasized the importance of the human element in job design. So this is where you start bringing in psychology. There's the Hawthorne studies on worker motivation. If you've never heard of the Hawthorne effect, go take a look at that. That was a really interesting story where they adjusted the lighting in the factory to measure the output. And so they increased the lighting and output went up. And then they decreased the lighting and output went up. And what it really was that the workers were being more efficient because management was paying attention to them. And it really became that worker motivation basis. And then there's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And then you got the two-factor theory, and then theory Y, theory X, and theory Z. Then decision models and management science. So this is where you start bringing math and sampling and operations research come into this whole thing, linear programming. All of this sort of starts entering into management. And then the last thing is the influence of Japanese manufacturers. And we'll go into this in the chapter on quality. There was Edward Deming that started with the quality revolution, and then the most recent advent has been just-in-time production. So some key issues for operations managers today: there's economic conditions, innovating, quality problems, risk management, competing in a global economy. Environmental concerns, sustainability, it's become a new buzzword, and it's really, you can't ignore it anymore. Sustainability is really using systems, resources in a way that do not harm ecological systems that support our existence as humans. So it goes beyond traditional measures, and it really goes into decision making. So all areas of the business will be affected: product and service design, customer education, disaster preparedness, supply chain waste management, outsourcing decisions. All of these, environmental sustainability is coming into all of these decisions now. And then ethical issues in operations. So, financial statements. You hear stories in the news where a company lied on their financial statements. Worker safety, where workers are hurt. Product safety, where someone buys something and it has to be recalled because it's not safe. Quality, environment, community, hiring and firing workers, closing facilities, workers' rights. All of those are ethical issues that really come into operations. And then the need for supply chain management. In the past, organizations did little to manage the supply chain beyond their own operations and immediate suppliers, which led to numerous problems. One of it is oscillating inventory levels. Inventory stockouts, late deliveries, quality problems. So one of the things, Walmart is famous for really managing the supply chain. If you are a toy manufacturer building G.I. Joes, I'm not with the latest toys, so I'm still back G.I. Joes. They have an information system that allows the G.I. Joe manufacturer to see every time a G.I. Joe is sold. So on a day-to-day basis, they know whether G.I. Joe A or G.I. Joe B is selling faster, and then they can manage their manufacturing to match that, so that when Walmart comes in with a new order for additional G.I. Joes, the manufacturer already knows that there's probably going to be an order because they see that demand. Supply chain issues. So there's a need to improve operations. There's increased levels of outsourcing, increasing transportation costs, competitive pressures, increasing globalization, increasing importance of e-business, the complexity of supply chains, and the need to manage inventories.